Pre-dawn fog held the Blue Ridge like a breath no one wanted to let go. Detective Caleb Rourke stood on the narrow access trail to Widow's Hollow, damp leaves slick under his boots, the air cold enough to sting his teeth when he spoke. Behind him, a K9 whined softly, impatient. Ahead, the hillside looked ordinary, ferns, a tangle of rhododendron, a skirt of rock, until you saw the seam. A crude door had been cut into the earth itself and faced over with bark and weathered planks lashed by old twine. Not a cabin door, a hiding place. "On my count," Caleb said, voice low. He didn't raise it, the team would hear him. They always did. The breacher set the charge, a handspan of plastic and tape that would make more noise in the bones than the trees. The tactical medic crouched offline with a jump bag open, her gloved fingers already moving in a rhythm she could do in the dark. Airway O2, pressure dressings. The K9 handler kept his shepherd tucked behind his knee, eyes cutting between the door and the slope that fell away toward the creek. The fog damped sound, but not memory. 16 file boxes in Caleb's office were filled with Blue Ridge names. Only one had a teal posted on the spine. He thought of it as the breacher thumbed a silent 3, 2, 1. The door coughed dust and gave, plank ends tearing like old bread. Caleb went first. He always did when the space was tight and the risk was unknown. A short tunnel angled right, the dirt walls packed with fern roots and mica flashes. It smelled like old ash and wet wool. His light found a room the size of a bedroom turned inside a hill. Blankets layered into a crude pallet, a tin cup blackened at the lip, twine hung like spider silk from an overhead joist, a makeshift cot sheened with years of body weight. And a crate, orange, brown, and battered, full of bound stacks, journals, the breath he'd been holding left him. "Left clear," he called. "No movement." "Right clear," the handler echoed half a beat behind. On the cot lay a woman. Gaunt, hair long and unkempt, skin the color of unvarnished pine, eyes open and fixed somewhere no one else could see. Caleb's light tracked up and found the mark on the wall above the cot, cut into the timber brace with a knife or a nail. A crescent, 2 short slashes beside it, crisp against older weathering. He felt the old cases tilt inside him, the way a map shifts when you notice a new road. "Medic," he said, already stepping in, one knee on dirt, a gloved hand raised to tell the team to hold their angles. The medic slid in like she'd trained under roots, quiet, quick, the bag at her hip swinging once and stilling, 2 fingers at the woman's throat, the other hand on the sternum. "Vitals are threadbare," she whispered, because in cramped places whispers carry better. Whoever kept her here, he knew the land. Caleb nodded and brought his light closer to the woman's face. He'd seen that face as 1,000 pixels, as printouts in a mother's hands, as a younger version on a laminated flyer that had hung in gas stations from Roanoke to Wytheville. The features were thinner now, as if the hills had taken a tax, but the eyes were the same, even open to somewhere else. "Mara Quinn," he said, calm and low, the way you talk to a skittish horse. "We've been looking for you a very long time." Her pupils twitched toward the light, not much but enough to tear something loose inside him. He turned the beam away. Outside, the K9 gave a small warning bark, the kind that says the world hasn't decided what it is yet. The handler's voice came tight through the tunnel. "Detective trail's dirty. He dragged brush behind him, knows how to erase." Caleb stood, angling his light toward the threshold. Just inside the earthen lip lay a shallow dish of ash, the size of a dinner plate. He crouched and probed gently with the tip of a pen. Char fell away from a scrap of fabric, teal once, now black at the edge and riddled with heat tears. He slid it into a paper evidence envelope, sealed it, and wrote, steady and neat, Exhibit A01. You never knew which small fidelity to process would save you later. "Rourke," the handler called again, lower now. Second set of prints, fresh, hex tread, angling into the brush, then gone. Caleb stepped into the mouth of the dugout and blinked against the gray of morning. The fog was lifting fingertip by fingertip from the laurels. He saw them then, partial hexagons pressed into soft loam, a clean pattern in a world that hated to give you any. They veered smartly off the trail and into a mess of branches that had no business being dragged where they were. The brush had been pulled behind, sweeping the ground. It wouldn't stop a real tracker. It would slow a hurried one. "Perimeter," he said into his chest mic. "Lock the creek line and the old stone fence. No one breaks off solo. He's on foot and he's thinking. I want long eyes on that lower game trail. If you have to choose between losing him and getting somebody hurt, you lose him." "Copy major crimes," came the reply from the outer ring. A calm voice, the kind you want in the fog. He went back in. The medic had a nasal cannula on the woman and a BP cuff around an arm so thin the Velcro almost wrapped twice. "She's alive," she said, and he heard the price in the words. "Barely." He let himself look at the crate. The journals were bound with rubber bands that had turned to amber and stuck to themselves. The top one had a hand-drawn map on its cover, a triangle of ridges and a creek like a looping thread. He didn't touch it, not yet. He lifted his light to the crescent on the brace again. 2 slashes, 2 winters, 2 attempts. A mind makes meaning faster than it should. He pressed his tongue to his back teeth and tasted metal. "Let's move her," he said. They worked the stretcher in the way people who trust each other do. Few words, forearms steady, boots placed where the last man's went. The K9 handler backed them out, scanning upslope and downslope. Outside, a slight breeze from the creek carried the tang of leaf rot and a hint of old smoke. Caleb logged it without judgment. The woods always smelled like something dying and something starting over. On the threshold, he glanced down and saw the ash dish again, the circle like a bad halo. He nudged it with the toe of his boot to see if there was anything metal underneath. Nothing, just the taste of a fire fed with small fuel. The stretcher cleared the door. The medic kept one hand on the bag's pump, counting under her breath. The dog swung its head left, right, then fixed on nothing, as if scent itself had stepped behind a tree. The ridge opposite was a silhouette, not a shape. A radio crackled in his ear. "Rourke, north perimeter, we've got a broken twig line that might be." "Hold your position," he said. "No chases, we play this long." He felt eyes. It was an old feeling, not mystical, just the accumulation of small cues. A shift of bird chatter, a hush along the understory, the sense that a deer would have bolted if it were only deer. He turned his head toward the slope where the hex prints had vanished and let the feeling sit there, identified and useless. Predators used time like cover. He had learned that in this job and in the one before it when he'd worn a different patch and called the hills by different names. They made it 40 yards down the access trail before the stretcher wobbled, not because of footing, because the woman who'd been looking beyond all of them looked at him. Her hand found his sleeve, fingers a bird's foot closing around line. The medic started to protest, "Ma'am, keep your," and shut up when she heard the sound the woman made. Not a moan, a word dragged through rust. Caleb bent close enough to feel the hospital plastic of the cannula against his cheek. Her breath was paper, the eyes were back from wherever they'd been. "He's still watching," she rasped. And then the grip loosened, and her gaze drifted past him to the ceiling of fog, as if the trees themselves had stepped in to listen. By late morning, the fog had burned off and Roanoke sat under a hard blue sky that made the mountains look closer than they ever were. Caleb parked his stay-tissued Suburban across from a brick fourplex off Wasna Avenue, the kind of building where every window had a different kind of blind. He killed the engine, but not the momentum in his chest. "He's still watching," kept replaying with the slow insistence of a GPS you can't shut off. Mara Quinn's door opened before he knocked. "I saw you pull up," she said, and stepped aside. Her apartment smelled faintly of coffee and dry erase marker. The living room had been colonized by a war. Corkboard stacked 3 deep, topo maps spreading across the wall like lichen, color-coded pushpins bristling over the Roanoke River and the forest beyond. FOIA packets, stamped, redacted, stubborn, were clipped into fat binders labeled by year. A laminated photo of Mara in a teal windbreaker, taken 3 weeks before she vanished, hung at eye level like a saint's card. "You said alive," Nora said, voice level, face not. "Say it again." "Alive," Caleb replied. He watched the word hit her. It didn't lift anything, it deepened it. Relief has weight when it lands on 8 years of waiting. "Where?" "I can't give you location," he said. "She's under care. She was conscious long enough to speak." "What did she?" She told me he's still watching. Something in Nora's shoulders tightened, then steadied. She looked past him at the boards. "Of course he is." A quick rap sounded behind Caleb. He recognized the cadence before the voice. Annika Salazar stepped in with a prosecutor's tote, her badge clipped in view but not in your face. She had driven over from the task force bullpen with that walk she had, efficient, don't make me repeat it. "Ms. Quinn," she said, "Detective, we need to talk chain, optics, and ground rules." Nora folded her arms. "Do we need to talk to the press or to my sister?" "Press can wait," Annika said. "Hospital protocols are not optional, neither is witness protection. The second this leaks, the thing in the woods turns into a circus and he'll use the noise." Nora's jaw worked. Noise is the only way anything moved for years. Caleb stepped toward the nearest board. He didn't glance at the sheet's coffee cup on the sill. He took in the pins first. They weren't random. 3 clusters formed a loose triangle around a slate-gray basin labeled BLACKWATER on the topo, with a second name penciled in beneath it. Granger Basin, locals say. He'd seen a triangle like that before in the shaft map on the journal cover. "You mapped our searches," he said. "I mapped yours," Nora corrected. She plucked a thumb drive from a ceramic dish full of paper clips and cheap batteries. "And mine, sightings log, call summaries, volunteer grids where you went and where you refused to go because of private land and budget overage. Spreadsheet on there with pattern weights. I'm not a cop detective, but I am very good with patterns." Annika set her tote on the one clear chair. "Ms. Quinn," Nora kept talking as if she hadn't heard. 2 days before Mara left, she went to Roanoke Hardware. Receipt says lithium AAs and an emergency whistle. She didn't carry those to take cute trail pictures. Lithium keeps in the cold. She was planning for failure. Caleb felt the ledger tilt again. Lithium AAs, the walkie they'd recovered in the fissure. He'd already sent it out, but the confirmation hadn't come back yet. He looked down at the laminated photo. Mara's smile wasn't posed. It was caught mid-laugh, hair kinked by humidity, teal bright even through lamination haze. "Don't call her lucky," Nora said, softer now, measured. "She's strategic. If she's alive, she fought for it." "We meet her where she is," Caleb replied, the line coming out before he could choose different words. "Not where the file froze." Annika's attention sharpened. "We do this by the book. Fresh eyes, no heroics. If we step wrong, the man who did this, if it is one man, walks on a suppression hearing after 8 years and a judge's scowl." "Tell me what by the book looks like when the book is scared of the woods," Nora said. The room got quiet in that particular way old apartments do, as if the radiators and the pipes were listening. Outside, a city bus sighed and pulled away, and distant on the greenway someone laughed big and free. It felt like the wrong soundtrack. Caleb walked the wall. He traced a finger an inch away from pushpins, gear slashes reported by day hikers, weird prints. He saw hex patterns circled, unconfirmed sightings. "You used local lore," he said. "I interviewed people who were ignored," Nora said, not proudly, not bitterly. "Retired rangers, volunteer fire crew, a woman at a diner who didn't trust cops but had eaten the same slice of lemon pie every Sunday for 40 years and noticed who sat where. This board is not gossip. It's data the county never valued because it didn't come in on letterhead." "Ms. Quinn," Annika said, and this time her voice dropped into the register that made juries lean in. "I believe you." Belief is not admissible. Evidence is. And right now, I'm your best shot at taking the man who did this into a courtroom and keeping him there. That means warrants for any private land, clean chain of custody for everything you've collected, and that means you do not, under any circumstances, put your own boots in those woods looking for him. He will read you like a trail. Nora's eyes found Caleb's. "Are you going to tell me to stay home?" He let the question stand a beat. "I'm going to tell you we need you, here, not as bait, not as a vigilante, not as another person he can use to control the narrative. We need your brain and your ledger." He lifted the drive. "We need this." Annika nodded once, as if she hadn't expected him to say it that way, and was pleased that he had. She opened her tote and produced a small evidence envelope. "We can log that now. You'll sign the transfer receipt." Nora handed over the drive without ceremony. "Do it however you want, just don't stop." There it was, the pivot he knew he'd stand on later when a judge asked him why he'd pushed instead of waited. Predators used time like cover. Bureaucracy used it like cement. His phone buzzed on the windowsill next to the cup. The preview banner flashed from Forensics, WALKIEAA not original. Activation LOGS mid-2022. He opened the text. Battery metallurgy suggested replacement or servicing mid-2022. The walkie hadn't sat dead since 2016. Someone had touched it, kept it alive, kept her within reach of a signal. "News?" Annika asked, reading his face. "The radio we pulled," he said, eyes still on the text. "It was powered after the original trip. Mid-2022, Nora swore quietly, a word with grief under it. So she found signal and he cut it, moved it, teased rescue with it. Or she serviced it," Caleb said. "She prepared for failure, you said. Maybe she also prepared for return." Annika was already moving. "If he or anyone handled that device after 2016, we have a timeline. We get the store to pull sales on lithium AAs in the nearest towns mid-2022, see if any cards pop that match our old suspects. We check pawn slips for used radios. Nora shook her head. He pays cash. He lives in the gaps. Caleb slipped the phone into his pocket. The teal on the laminated photo caught a band of sunlight and flared for a second, like a beacon that didn't need batteries at all. Then we make the gaps smaller, he said, and we don't give him a day to vanish. Breaker's Chasm wasn't on any tourist brochure. It was a scar where granite had split and kept going, a quarter-mile off-trail down a slope that earned every foot. Caleb followed the rope team through laurel that snatched at sleeves, the Suburban shrinking to a memory up on the two-track. The K9's bell, just a tiny brass tag on his collar, tinked as he threaded the brush, then went quiet as the dog settled into work. "Watch the lip," said the rope lead, a lean woman with a mustache of chalk dust on her upper lip and the nickname Hawk stenciled on her helmet. 2 feet looks solid, the third will go out from under you. Caleb leaned over the fissure. The earth fell away to a vertical slot, maybe 4 feet wide at the top, widening to a black throat. 50 feet down, a ledge caught the light like a wet tooth. He could taste mineral in the air, wet stone and iron, the tang of old tin. Vic Armitage knelt at the edge with the casual intimacy of a man who'd lived his career over drop-offs. He wore a balaclava around his neck like a scarf and tapped the rock with a gloved knuckle. "Acoustic says 5 stories to hard floor," he said. "Ledge at 49, you see that stitch of teal?" Caleb did, a frayed splash of color wedged in a crack as if the stone itself had tried to keep it. The rope team had already set anchors in a pair of stout hickories. Lines hummed as carabiners kissed and locked. Annika had stayed up top, inside the tape with a deputy from the sheriff's office who kept checking his watch like their schedule could bully geology. "No heroics," she'd said, with a look that landed and stayed. Caleb wasn't on rope. He'd done enough of that under a different banner. He worked the perimeter with the K9 handler, then came back to the lip to watch Vic go over. "Test line," Hawk called. "On belay," a tech answered. Vic swung into the slot, boots scraping the rope, hissing softly. His voice floated up calm, precise. "Ledge 5 feet north of Plum, I'm on it." Caleb crouched, listening. Being topside when people you needed were below had always been the worst part. The helpless angle, the trust in knots you hadn't tied. He put a hand on the cold rock and let it ground him. "Object 1, Vic said. "Backpack canvas torn, initials green-stitched MQ. GPS pouch empty. Object 2, windbreaker, teal, crumpled and lodged as if blown down canyon. Both appear weathered, not fresh." A pause. Then Object 3, wedged in a crack, talkie. Off the shelf, not SAR grade. It's cocked toward the sky like someone tried to give it a line of sight. Caleb pictured Mara bracing herself in this throat of stone, fingers numbed with cold, cramming a cheap radio into a seam, angling it toward a light she couldn't reach. He heard Nora's voice in his head. She planned for failure. "We've got battery residue on the casing," Vic went on, voice smaller with distance. "We'll swab, but metallurgy will tell you if these cells were swapped. Given your text, mid-2022, this fits." "Photograph, then bag," Caleb said, hating how obvious it sounded and saying it anyway. "Protocol is a prayer you keep repeating so you don't improvise your way into a mistrial." The K9 handler whistled softly from the duff to Caleb's left. "You need to see this." He had on nitrile gloves and was crouched in a patch of dry soil under a rock shelf where the rain had never quite won. 3 sets, degraded," he said, pointing with a capped Sharpie. "Small barefoot, ball narrow, female maybe, larger boot with hex tread, your guy, and a third partial, can't read it all. Toe box is weird, could be an older boot, could be a homemade wrap." Caleb squatted, careful not to breathe too hard. On the dry crescent where runoff had never washed it clean, the prints made a pale history of movements. One set overlapped another, scuffing, hesitating, one heel sliding as if someone had stopped suddenly. He could make himself see stories here that weren't true, and the awareness of that, of his own hunger, was a discipline he had to keep naming. "Flag it and cast what you can," he said. "We get the partial even if it's ugly." "Ugly is my specialty," the handler said, faint grin, and set about spraying a fine fixative mist that smelled like acetone and bad intentions. Hawk's rope clinked. Vic called up 2 more points of interest. Small hearth site at the secondary exit, 3 meters east by southeast of the fissure mouth. Char present, squirrel bone, long since denuded, stick sharpened and hardened by fire, primitive point. My guess, cooking and tool making within a year. I'll scoop a char sample for carbon range. Caleb looked up from the prints to the stone flange Vic was describing. There was an alternate breathing hole there, masked by scrub. If you knew this place like a lung, you could move air in and out without showing yourself. So she didn't just fall, he said, mostly to the rock. She adapted. She lived, Vic replied, quiet as if speaking to a chapel. And someone else lived around her. Copy, Annika's voice crackled from a radio topside, brittle with careful patience. Let's not editorialize on open channels. Caleb could feel her fear inside that line, as honest as the rope under his hands. If they were building a case, his awe couldn't leak into his notes. But privately, he let the truth sit. Mara had made a life that wasn't supposed to be possible, in a gap where weather and statute didn't want to go. The deputy by the tape cleared his throat. "We got a Mr. Lane on the line," he called over. "Says we're on his posted land by 6 inches and he wants our asses gone unless we've got paper with his name on it." Annika raised a hand without turning. "Tell Mr. Lane we're preserving life and evidence, and that if he obstructs, we'll read him his rights under obstruction code 18-2460. Also tell him we will be very, very nice if he lets us finish our job like good neighbors." The deputy relayed the message, sanitizing the bite. Caleb didn't move his eyes from the fisher. Time was a kind of landowner, too. "Bagged," Vic said. "Windbreaker fragment flaked during removal. We'll stabilize it later. Backpack gives me that wet canvas smell that never goes away. No obvious blood staining on the exposed panels. The talkie is a gem, cheap, dirty, but there's oil on the PTT button that didn't come from rain. Fingerprint chances are low, but we'll try coming up." He rose hand over hand, boots finding notches like he'd cut them himself. When Vic rolled over the lip, mud streaked his cheekbone. He handed the evidence up like an altar boy with the chalice, careful, reverent, resigned to gravity. Caleb took the radio first. It weighed almost nothing. He could imagine the exact cheap crinkle of its plastic bag when Mara bought it, the way cashiers always ask if you want a warranty on something that's going to live in the rain. "Why wedge it here?" he asked. "Stone throat's a waveguide," Vic said. "Aim it up, you bounce past canopy clutter. If she had any line to a repeater, it was through geometry." Geometry and stubbornness. He sealed the bag. The K9, nose low, whined once and trotted toward the secondary exit. The handler followed, pausing at a tiny smear of soot on rock. "Fire's real," he called. "Not campsite pretty, just enough." A gust slid along the lip and rattled leaves like a warning. Caleb's phone buzzed in his pocket, not the polite tap of a text, but a call with insistence. He checked the screen, GARETHWINSLOW. He didn't know the man, but he knew his type, surveyors with long memory and longer lunches. "Rourke," Caleb answered. The voice on the other end was old Virginia gravel. "Detective name's Gareth Winslow. I got your card from Deputy Lyle. I've got a trail cam out off Hunter's Run I haven't pulled since 21. Battery lights still blinking. Thought you might want first look." "What's on it, mister?" "Winslow, I don't know yet," the man said, and Caleb could hear the smile that only comes from being the one with the unopened box. "But the stamp reads 8/11/22 on one of the shots, and there's a figure in frame. Barefoot, headed east, didn't look lost, looked like she heard the shutter." Caleb stared into the crack of sky above the fisher. The day snapped into a new angle. "Text me the coordinates," he said, already motioning to Annika, to the handler, to the world. "And don't touch the card." The wildlife lab was a windowless box in the basement of the county building, part evidence locker, part IT closet. It smelled like old carpet, dusted monitors, and coffee that had been reheated too many times. On a steel table, Mina Cho had set out a sterile mat, nitrile gloves, and a small pelican case labeled WINSLOW, Hunter's Run in Sharpie. Gareth Winslow hovered like a man who'd brought in a newborn and wasn't sure the doctors weren't going to swap it. "You're not keeping the camera," he said, eyes flicking between Caleb and the case. "I want that clear. The SD card's yours to borrow." "The Bushnell's mine. You'll get your hardware back," Mina said without looking up. "We're imaging the card, not the camera. You'll also sign a receipt because we're very polite." Caleb leaned against a file cabinet and let the tension settle. "We appreciate you calling us first, Mr. Winslow." Gareth grunted. "The sheriff's office once borrowed a trail cam and never brought it back. That deputy's a city boy who thinks he invented the woods." He tugged the brim of his seed company cap. "I don't trust people who don't know where to put their feet." Mina snapped on gloves, card out. She worked a spudger into the slot and eased the microSD onto the mat like a jeweler with a fragile stone. "We'll do a bit for bit. Time stamps can be junk if the internal clock drifted. We'll correct against sunrise and the temperature delta if we need to." "Jargon means she knows what she's doing," Caleb told Gareth. "Let her cook." The first pass pulled a directory tree, DCIM 100 media, 387 files. Mina opened a utility that turned raw sensor timestamps into a visual strip across a month. OK, long gap after 2021. Then motion pings resume in July 22. Here's August. File 224225226. That's the one stamped 5:14 a.m. 8/11/2022. She glanced up. You ready? Gareth folded his arms. Been ready since I put the dang camera up. Mina double-clicked. Dawn poured onto the screen in gray-blue pixels, a shallow wash of light, trees like upright brushstrokes, the service rode a pale ribbon. For a heartbeat nothing moved, and then a figure entered frame from the left, barefoot, wrapped in a dark cloth that hung from one shoulder like a torn cloak. The gait was uneven but not lost. Every footfall was a choice. She glanced up. Caleb felt the tiny click of the camera shutter in his teeth the way he'd felt the breacher's thump in Widow's Hollow. On screen, the woman heard it too. She turned her head toward the lens with a clarity that made the hairs rise on his forearms. Her face was gaunt but alert, lucid. A hand lifted, not in a wave, not in appeal, more like a reflex to shield against the sudden witness of the machine. It's her, Gareth whispered almost to himself. It's the Quinn girl. Mina froze the frame and zoomed until the pixels started to stair-step. Barefoot. No hard sole wear lines. The dark wrap could be a blanket cut down. Gait asymmetry left hips guarding, but look at the angle of her shoulders to the road. She's not meandering on a path, she's cutting across it. She's not wandering, Mina said, voice gone clinical in the way that made juries believe you. She's vectoring. Caleb exhaled the breath he'd held since they started the clip. Play the next 10 seconds. Mina did. The woman moved out of frame into the thicker understory. No second figure, no pursuit, just that deliberate line. The next file showed a fox nosing the ditch at 5:22, then nothing until the sun burned the image white. Where was the camera? Caleb asked. Gareth slid a topo from his case. Half-mile east of Breaker's Chasm, here. He tapped with a blunt fingernail. Posted on a cedar 6 feet up, 100 yards from the old Spur Creek fire line. Mina swiveled to another monitor and brought up Guy's layers. Let's route it, she said. She dropped a pin at the cave's secondary exit Vic had marked, another at the camera coordinates Gareth gave, and a third on the old fire line. Lines snapped between them like rubber bands. Caleb watched the mountain peeled into map. From the fissure, she hugs the contour, stays low in the shadow band, crosses the road at an angle that keeps her out of open view, and hits Spur Creek, which runs roughly south-north along Blackwater's eastern lip, Mina added, toggling on a hydrology layer. She pulled up Nora's thumb drive and overlaid the pins from the war room already digitized by a junior analyst. Gear slashes, odd prints. Watcher reports. He could almost feel Nora's hours compile into something you could measure. The screen filled with color, red for confirmed incidents, blue for reports, green for formal searches. The cluster bled together into a shape that wasn't quite a triangle until you drew the edge of Blackwater Basin in black. The local's name, Granger Basin, penciled in by Nora, appeared in the metadata. There it is, Mina said, leaning back. A corridor, 3-sided. The north edge tracks the Spur Creek fire line. The west edge rides the ridgeline where cameras are rare. The east edge runs that service road where Mr. Winslow hung his stubborn little witness. She glanced at Gareth. No offense. None taken, Gareth said, pride sneaking into his voice. That cedar's seen more truth than some courthouses. Caleb's phone lit with a text from the hospital. Mara stabilized, limited speech, safe house arranged. He typed a quick copy to Nora. We found a clip from 8/11/22. It's her, she's moving with intent. He didn't hit send yet. He didn't want to hand her hope without context. Time-stamp correction? He asked. Mina brought up a NOAA sunrise table, called the lab clock, checked the Bushnell's internal and the actual first light in the clip. Card was fast by 8 minutes, consistent drift for that model. Adjusted, the shot is 5:06. Sunrise was 6:28 that day. That's nautical dawn. She's using low light. She's using cover, Caleb said, almost to the map. The lab door opened and Nora stepped in, breath short like she'd jogged the stairs instead of taking the elevator. She scanned faces before the screen. Don't tell me it's nothing. Mina hit pause on the frame where the woman looked into the lens. The room's fluorescent buzz seemed to lower, like even the ballast wanted to listen. Nora pressed a hand to the table and leaned in. Her mouth trembled, then set. She made it out, she said, voice even. The question is why she vanished again. She saw the camera, Caleb said. which means she was lucid and cautious. If she believed she was being watched, she'd avoid every device we use to rescue people. She bypasses trailheads. She picks the fire line. She keeps to the shadow band and cuts your search grids like they're fences made of air. Nora didn't cry. She breathed once with the violence of someone who'd carried air for two, then stood straighter. "Then we don't corner her," she said. "We meet her where she is, not where the file froze," Caleb finished because the line was already part of his bones. Gareth cleared his throat. "You going to catch the bastard who likes to leave rabbit carcasses on girls' doors, or you going to keep drawing pretty lines?" No one told him to sit down. He'd earned the right to be sharp. Caleb nodded. "We're done drawing, we're hunting." Mina's fingers danced. "Before you cowboy up one more layer." She toggled to winter satellite thermal data and scrubbed through last December and January. The basin remained a cold sea speckled with warm dots, houses, small brush piles, and occasional truck engine. Then a flare bloomed near the Spur Creek fire line, a rectangular heat signature bright and brief like a match cupped against the wind. "What's that?" Nora asked. "Looks like a structure fire," Mina said. "Not a crown fire, localized. Spur Creek Station was decommissioned in '09, the ranger cabin's supposed to be derelict. But on January 17th, we've got a heat anomaly right where the cabin footprint is." Caleb felt the map click again. The corridor wasn't just travel, it was shelter. "Pull historical satellite," he said, "and county fire reports. If the cabin burned, someone lit it. If it smoked, someone warmed up in it." Mina turned from the screen. "If you're thinking what I am, I'm thinking we lace up," Caleb said. He finally hit send on the text to Nora and added another. "There's a burned ranger cabin on Spur Creek we need to see. Today." Gareth touched the brim of his cap. "I've got a chainsaw and a tank of gas if the road's choked." "We'll take bolt cutters over a saw," Caleb said, managing half a smile. "Quieter." He took a last look at the frozen frame, Mara mid-turn, eyes sharp as a hawk's, and felt the pull of the basin like a weather front. Outside, the afternoon had turned hot over the river, cicadas filing their grievances. Inside, the corridor on the screen looked simple. 3 lines, 1 basin, a point of heat. Simple was a lie, but it was their kind of lie, the kind you could use to build a trap. They left the Suburban at the rusting gate and hiked the last half-mile on foot, Spur Creek murmuring somewhere down in the dark. Unseen trench the fire line followed. Tom Kincaid, retired ranger in a sun-bleached ball cap, shoulders still square despite the years, set the pace with a steady, unshowy stride that made the trail feel like a hallway he'd walked 1,000 times. "Cabin's 2 bends past that snag," Tom said without turning. "Was decommissioned in '09. County never came for the tin roof. Kids peeled most of it to patch deer stands." Caleb watched the ground more than the trees, dry duff over clay, old blackened pine cones from a burn sometime in the 2000s. 3 parallel scratches at knee height on a birch elk rub or bored teenager, hard to tell. He clocked each thing and threw away what didn't matter. "You good on authority here?" Tom asked, voice low but carrying. "Place is technically public, but we've had lawyers squint at maps like they could bill the trees by the acre." "Public land, exigent circumstances," Caleb said, "and I signed an affidavit for an anticipatory warrant if we find anything that pushes it private. Annika not letting me lose a case on paper." "Good," Tom said, "because this woods'll let you win wrong if you ask it to." The cabin appeared like a piano dropped into the green. Rectangular, 1 room, the stovepipe a bent finger pointing at nothing. Soot licked the eaves. 1 wall had collapsed and been braced with a sapling, and 3 nails someone drove with quiet urgency. The smell was rain-wet ash and mouse nest. Tom stopped at the threshold. "You want me to lead or you want the honor?" "Honor's a church word," Caleb said, but he put a hand on the door frame and felt for the telltale grit that says a place has been opened lately. Dust lay unbroken. He slipped on nitrile gloves and nodded Tom inside. They went slow. The light through the broken roof made the interior look underwater, beams mottled by leaf shadows. The corner where a bed lay made from burlap and something that had once had fur. The fireplace on the far wall held gray ash in a thin pan, not a campfire heap, controlled burns purposefully small. Above the hearth, the log timbers caught Caleb's eye. Shallow scratches, notches up and up like a prisoner's calendar, then dates carved along the vertical brace in a tidy hand. 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, some struck through with a single decisive line. "She was counting winters," Caleb said, softer than he meant to. Tom crouched, 1 hand braced on his thigh. or counting chances. Caleb took pictures, each tally, each date, the burlap and pelt bed, a metal cup with soot at the lip. He angled his light high along the inside of the eaves. There, faint, easy to miss unless you were looking for it. A crescent carved into the wood, 2 short slashes beside it, the same mark as the dugout. It vibrated in his chest like a chord he didn't like. "Damn," Tom breathed. "See that? I see it," Caleb said. He kept taking pictures, but something in him wanted to scrape the mark clean with his thumbnail, as if erasing it would unfurl time. He did not touch it. His phone hummed with a single buzz, a text from the hospital liaison, Mara awake intermittently, asking for Nora. He thumbed a reply, "We're in Spur Creek cabin. Numbers on the wall. We'll call." Then dialed Nora. She picked up mid-breath. "Say something good or say nothing. We found a cabin she used," he said. "Dates, tally marks, a sleeping wrap. You were right about Winters." Silence, then Nora's voice, steady as milled lumber. "She warned me. She warned us." Caleb hesitated. "Warned? 2 years into the searches, I got a call from a number that didn't exist," Nora said. No voice. Just a radio beep and then nothing. I told myself it was spam, then I told myself it was Mara, and then I stopped telling myself anything because no one cared what I told myself. "We care now," he said, and meant it, and felt how late it was to mean it. Tom's low whistle drew him to the hearth. The ranger was on one knee, fingers in a gap between stones. "There's a void behind this cap," Tom said. These old stoves had a little hidey hole where rangers kept a bottle the superintendent wasn't supposed to find. Caleb angled his light and saw it, a narrow niche the size of a paperback, mortar crumbled just enough to suggest new fingers and old patience. He worked a slender pry tool from his vest, slid it along the stone, and gently eased the cap out. Behind it, dry darkness. He reached in, gloved, and his fingers found paper. He drew out a folded scrap, not notebook white, but brownish like grocery sack, crease-worn and soft. He placed it on the sterile pad he unrolled for field documents. Tom hovered, breath held. Caleb lifted the first flap with the corner of his glove, like a magician who hated tricks. Ink, careful handwriting, not the feral scrawl of the mine. He read aloud. "Don't trust the man near the road. He followed me, slept outside the cave. I saw him twice. If I'm gone, tell Nora I tried." Tom exhaled a slow, unprintable word. Caleb stared at the loop of the G and gone until his vision doubled and righted. The note's voice was not desperate. It was exact. He shot images, then sealed the note in a Tyvek evidence sleeve and called Dr. Lena Morrill. She picked up on the second ring, voice bright from a campus office that always smelled like pencil shavings and highlighters. "Doctor," Caleb said, "field find in Spur Creek. Brown paper, block capitals for the header line, then a smooth, slightly right-leaning script. Can I send a secure image for preliminary class characteristics?" "You may," Morrill said. "And you may not ask me to declare it hers over the phone." "I wouldn't," he said. The image went through. He waited, watching Tom track the wall with a fingertip just shy of touching. Morrill hummed softly as she studied. "Same baseline discipline we saw in Mara's old field journals, steady economical loops, no ostentatious flourishes, the capital N in Nora matches. The habit of crossing TS on the downstroke is consistent. I'll need the original for pressure analysis, but my preliminary read, high likelihood class match." "Thank you," Caleb said. "Don't thank me yet," Morrill replied. "Your problem isn't who wrote it, it's who she's warning you about." He ended the call and looked up at the eaves again, at the crescent and its 2 slashes carved faint, as if whoever did it didn't want to wake the wood. He took another picture and made himself file the rage where he kept the other things that would ruin his notes if they got loose. "Trail outside shows old boot cuts," Tom said from the threshold. He pointed to a place where the clay held a memory of weight. "Not recent, but there's a hex pattern on the toe you'd recognize in a lineup." Caleb stepped into the doorway. The air moved differently out here, a pickpocket breeze that slid down off the ridge and lifted sweat off his neck. The clearing held the heavy quiet of places where something had watched something else for a long time. His phone rang again. "Annika." "Talk," she said. "We've got a Mara note from a niche by the hearth, warning about a man near the road sleeping outside the cave. Crescent slash on the eaves, tally marks, it's her place at least for a while." "Good," Annika said. "I ran your mark past records while you were hiking. There's an old incident in Greene County, 98, barn and cabin fire. Owner was a recluse named Alvin Crowell. 4 complaints of stalking hikers, never charged. After the fire, he disappeared. One of the archived photos from the site shows a crescent with 2 slashes carved into a window frame. Guess who took the photo? Eddie Lyle, back when he was a baby deputy. Caleb looked at the mark again and felt the room tilt downhill. You sure as one Xerox of a 35 print lets me be. I've pulled the original from the courthouse basement. Lyle's meeting us after dinner. He says folks called Crowell the man the woods kept. Tom turned his head, listening to Caleb listen. Something. Maybe a bridge across 25 years, Caleb said. Maybe another myth with a man inside it. He photographed the eaves a last time. The sun had shifted. The crescent's shadow made a third slash briefly, a trick of angle and light. He stepped back and felt the prickle again along his shoulders, the sensation he'd learned not to ignore. Back door, Tom said, pointing to a rough cut in the rear wall patched with saplings. You think he sat out there and watched the door he wanted to own? Caleb didn't answer. He moved to the patch, peered through, and saw the old fire line descending in a crooked scar toward the service road. A direct line of sight if you knew where to put your eyes. He imagined a figure leaning into the trunk of a cedar, breathing with the trees, learning the rhythm of a woman who had turned herself into a ridgewalker to survive. His radio hissed with a light, meaningless burst, the kind you get when someone keys a mic by accident. He waited. Nothing. The woods, indifferent and busy, moved on. Bag the ash, he said. Photograph the bed and pull the fibers. Cast the older boot if it'll take. And Tom, yeah, if anyone asks, we were never here alone. This place eats men who get cocky. Tom's grin was thin. Amen. And we don't bring amen to court, do we? We bring receipts, Caleb said. He slid the Tyvek sleeve with Mara's note into the hard case and clicked it shut. The snap echoed too loud in the small room. On the way out, he touched the door jamb with the back of his glove, the way you pat a horse you don't quite trust. When they stepped into the trees, the cabin disappeared behind them as quickly as it had appeared, the way places do when they want to stay secrets. On the two-track back to the truck, the first skeins of evening light threaded through the branches. Somewhere far off, the loudspeaker at a high school field crackled to life, a Friday night voice rising and falling in the kind of excitement the woods never felt. Caleb let the noise drift across his mind and away. Crowell, crescent and slashes, a warning tucked behind stone. He felt the case take a breath, then another, like it had been held underwater and was finally, violently coming up for air. The task force room used to be a DMV testing space, which meant it still had the stale smell of pencil shavings and failed patients. Now it was a square of rolling whiteboards, a jitter of printers, and a wall of maps that tracked more hope than roads. Caleb stood beside a coffee urn that had boiled its soul away hours ago, watching the projector paint Alvin Crowell's name on the cinder block like a sentence. Annika clicked to the first slide. A scanned page from a 1997 deposition, Greene County v. Crowell, taken after a trespass complaint by a couple from Charlottesville. The font was the kind of courier that made every word feel like a typewriter verdict. Question, Annika read, do you understand posted boundaries? Answer, there are rules older than ink. The Greene doesn't take kindly to trespassers. She looked over the top of the laptop. He refused counsel, talked for 2 hours, and never once conceded the county had jurisdiction over his land or over him. Doctor. Lena Morrill sat with a legal pad in her lap, knees crossed, glasses halfway down her nose in a pose that made juries want to confess their childhoods. Control-driven language, she said, tapping her pen. A sovereignty fantasy, compulsion to define space and the bodies in it. The woods aren't just property, they're a system where he is magistrate. Caleb felt the cabin ash in his throat again. He carved law into eaves, the crescent and slashes, those aren't art, they're signage. Annika advanced to a photocopied photo, a charred window frame from 1998, crescent plus 2 slashes visible in the soot. Greene County barn and cabin fire, she said. Owner Alvin Crowell, 4 pre-fire incidents, hikers followed, tents slashed, 1 rabbit strung above a trailhead board. He vanished after the fire. Eddie Lyle took the photo on scene. We've pinged him. Rabbit, Nora said from the back row, voice level, arms folded tight. She fought to be allowed in, and Annika had allowed it with a seating chart. Mara found one hung from a pine outside the cave. Morrill's pen paused. Symbolic provisioning, she said. Gift-giving as domination. I feed you, you belong. It tracks with a non-lethal captivity fantasy until defiance. The screen shifted to a page of message board text tiled like linoleum. Mina had scraped it from an ancient prepper forum called Backwoods Bastion. Username, Wraith P. Posting range, 2009-2019. Mina pointed with a capped marker. He calls the Blue Ridge the Shadowlands, talks about rule of green and ridge walking as if they're covenants. He lectures on countersign, dragging branches to break spoor, cutting cross angles at service roads, using shadow bands to move unseen. She toggled to a linguistics overlay. A curiosity, his spelling of trespassers consistently drops the second S, same as Crowell's deposition. Annika raised an eyebrow. Stylometry on a forum post won't get you a warrant. No, Mina said, unoffended, but it strengthens your probable cause when tied to the mark, the timeline, and the geography. She clicked again. Overlays of Wraith P's described routes matched against Nora's triangle, Spur Creek, the ridgeline, the service road. The corridors stapled together. A knock. The door opened and Eddie Lyle walked in carrying a banker's box like it used to be an infant and now just had to be what it was. He wore a bolo tie with a turquoise chip and the look of a man who had been dismissed by people who couldn't, in a pinch, start a fire in the rain. "You're late," Annika said, but she smiled when she said it. "County clerk put the box in with the yearbooks," Eddie replied. "Had to buy her a slice of lemon pie to get it back. Marla's still slicing them the same in Madison." He set the box on the table and fished out a paper sleeve of negatives and a handful of 4x6 drugstore prints. When he slid across to Caleb, black timber, the crescent, the 2 slashes, a handwritten note on the margin, Crowell Place, recovered after fire, 98 EL. "Why'd you keep the prints?" Caleb asked. Eddie shrugged. "Because I had the feeling the mountains weren't done saying that man's name." Annika spread the prints with gloved fingers. "Did you ever meet him?" "Twice," Eddie said. "Once in uniform, once in the church parking lot. He had a way of standing like he was already leaned into a tree, didn't blink much, smelled like smoke and machine oil. Told me some people ain't meant to walk in the green." Eddie looked at the wall map. He meant women who walked alone. He meant anybody who didn't take his rules. "So he's a myth with an address," Caleb said. Morrill lifted her pad. "My profile, adult male, late 50s to early 70s now, physically lean, long-gated, used to uneven ground, antisocial traits with grievance narrative. Survivalist competence, fixation on self-reliant women, women who choose solitude or self-determination. He keeps them by disabling their choices. The teal motif, windbreaker, fabric could be incidental, but if we see repetition of a color in his materials, it's either Targa tankard or his signature for himself." Annika crossed her arms. "And your operational recommendation? Treat him as both hunter and curator," Morrill said. "He observes, catalogs, returns. He is patient. He likes to keep, not kill, until his order is defied. If Mara escaped in 2022, he reconstituted his pattern elsewhere. He will circle the original site out of compulsion." Nora leaned forward. "So he's coming back." Morrill didn't sugar it. "Yes." Annika closed the laptop. "Here's what we need to not do. Trample private land without paper, poison our case with bad chain, or build a castle out of folklore we can't defend in front of a judge. Caleb, I need parcel maps and permission from 3 landowners along Spur Creek if we're going to put cameras or step foot. We'll pursue a geofenced warrant for motion sensors on county right-of-way." "No cowboying, say it with me." Caleb stared at the prints, at the carved crescent that had followed them from dugout to cabin to a charred window in another county, and at his own reflection, faint in the glossy paper. He wanted the woods. He wanted to be moving. He wanted to cut the angle before the man with the hex-thread boots cut his. "Predators use time like cover," he said, flat. "If we gift him a week of paperwork, we're the reason the next woman has tally marks." Annika didn't blink. "And if you blow the warrant, we are the reason he walks. That is a different kind of tally." She softened, barely. "I'm not your opponent. I'm your lock on the door after you drag him in." Eddie cleared his throat. "You want lore you can use?" He nodded toward the map. "There's a diner off Route 33 near the county line. Marla Dean's been pouring coffee there for 50 years and hears more truth than a wiretap. She's the one told me Crowell could walk a ridge without stirring a bird." "Fine," Annika said. "Take Caleb and your box of ghosts. Get me something with a name I can sign under. Then come home before dark." The diner was chrome and glass, a 1970s capsule where the same radio station had been playing since Reagan. A bell jingled when they came in, and the pie case glowed like a votive rack. Marla Dean had a pencil stuck behind one ear and the unkillable kindness of someone who'd been tipped in dollars and stories her whole life. "You boys and your cases," she said, setting down 3 mugs without asking. "Cream S on the table. Who's paying for Eddie S?" She winked at Caleb. "I assume the state's good for coffee." "We're looking for the man folks called the one the woods kept," Eddie said, gentle as laying down a card. Marla's face didn't change. Crowell, Alvin when his mother was alive, Crow when he wanted to be someone else. She poured, let the steam rise. He used to sit in that booth and read magazines he never paid for, Soldier of Fortune, backwoodsman, cut out articles with a pocket knife so neat I had to count the pages to know they were gone. "Did he talk?" Caleb asked. "Only in weather," she said. "He'd say the ridge is loud today when the wind was up, or the hollers keeping secrets when the fog set." He looked at women like maps. Some men look like that and it's clumsy. On him it felt like he was clockwise and you were late. "Did he ever mention rules?" Morrill asked quietly. She'd come along, trading her campus pen for a receipt book in case she needed to take a statement. Marla nodded once. "Said there were rules of the green. Said some folks broke them just by breathing where he could hear." She thumbed toward the clock. "And you don't have long, he liked to move right before dark." Caleb dropped a 20 under his saucer and stood. "Thank you, ma'am." "Bring the girl home," Marla said, not a plea, an instruction. They were 3 miles from the basin when the first of the new motion sensor pings hit Mina's dashboard back at the task force room. She deranged a geofenced warrant for county right-of-way and convinced 3 skeptical landowners with Eddie's name and Annika's paper to let her mount passive cameras along Hollow Creek's abandoned shaft line. She called Caleb on the car's speaker. "We have movement near shaft 12, she said, voice flat with too much adrenaline. Tall figure, angular silhouette, object on the shoulder that resolves like a rifle at distance, hex tread on the near boot, time stamp 1842. Annika cut in on the second line. "Stay on the road until we can vector the tactical team. No heroics." Caleb's hand closed on the wheel until the leather creaked. Out the passenger window, the mountains darkened along their ribs. "Copy," he said, even as his mind began to draw angles the maps hadn't yet caught. By full dark, the mountain had shut its eyes. Hollow Creek Shaft 12 lay behind a curtain of rhododendron as glossy as wet leather. The tactical pair, Ortiz and Haller, moved first, black helmets a shade darker than night, chest rigs quiet. Vic Armitage came third with a 4-gas meter clipped to his vest. Its green led the only cheerful thing in 100 yards. Caleb took fourth, one hand on the rough back of a cedar to feel the wind and the other on the rail of the old adit. Annika's voice lived in his ear, no heroics. The motion ping from 1842 lived there too, louder. "Air reads clean," Vic whispered, tapping the meter. O2 at 20.9, co-negligible, no hydrogen sulfide, watch your footing, old timber, new gravity. Ortiz palmed a chem light, snapped it, and dropped the dim red glow just inside the mouth so they wouldn't blind themselves when they looked back. The shaft breathed cool, smelling of iron filings and bat guano, a cold-blooded smell that made your molars ache. Haller angled a mirror on a stick around the first bend. "No wire, no plates," he murmured. "Either he trusts the place or he likes us breathing." Caleb kept his light low, letting the mind tell its story. Rusted track, a sleeve of water no wider than a boot sole, ripples moving toward them as if something had just pulled away. The ceiling dipped, splinters of old shoring hung like ribs. He felt the jumpy animal in his chest, part fear, part impatience, shake the cage. "Slow," he said, not for the team, for himself. The lair announced itself without drama, a cot made from a door across 2 cinder blocks, a lantern blackened at the crown, a pile of rags that had once been shirts and blankets, and a wall. The wall made the place a person. On old cribbing boards, faces had been pinned with rusted nails, women torn from flyers and newsprint, ink gone purple at the edges. Some faces were crossed out with a single black slash. 2 Maras among them were circled. The circle looked like it had been carved into his own chest. Ortiz lifted her chin toward the display. "That's not camp," she said. "That's a chapel." "Don't use the word," Caleb said automatically, the superstition of courtrooms threading into caves. But he felt it, something worshipped here. Vic went to his knees by a tin can on a crate. He swabbed the greasy lip with a protein test that turned a shy green. "Fresh meat residue," he said. "Not canned beans. We'll do gas chromatography back at the lab, but field says yes. Within 2-3 days. He sniffed, made a face. If he's cooking in here, he knows the air. That means practice. Caleb's light found a notebook on the crate under the tin. The cover, once cardboard, had turned to felt from oil and handling. He lifted it with tweezers and opened it onto a clean pad. The handwriting was a slanted fever, lines crowding each other, letters leaning like they were trying to run. Not Mara's steady hand, Not anyone's he wanted to know. He read, not to understand, understanding could wait, but to register, dates without years. Rules in fragments, she stays if she listens. She walks when the ridge calls, but the ridge is mine. Stay. The word had been rewritten in block letters that dug through the page, the graphite pressed so hard the next page wore it like a bruise. In the margins, a rough sketch of Mara's face, the teal jacket shaded with a carpenter's impatience. He felt the mind contract around them. The notebook made the man real in a way the trail camera and the symbol hadn't. This wasn't myth, it was a voice that couldn't live anywhere but underground. Photograph, he said. Then bag. He lifted his radio. We got him on paper, he told Mina and Annika in the lab. We don't have him in cuffs. Static, then Mina, whoever he is, he reads us like a trail. Motion sensors went quiet after the ping. He's not dumb. Or he's under our feet, Haller muttered, sweeping his light along a seam that ran like a vein down the left wall. This shaft has ribs. You could hide a man in one and never know until you stepped on his breath. Don't get poetic, Ortiz said. Makes me itchy. Caleb moved to the far corner where the cribbing met raw stone. A photograph had been nailed there with a roofing nail so big it had split the board. Mara, pre-disappearance, smiling hard enough to blur. The nail had driven through the V in MARA Volunteers 4 Trail Clean UP. He wanted to tear it down with his hands. He took a breath, matched his anger to the evidence, and called for Vic. We'll dust the head, Vic said, already fishing out a magnetic wand and black powder. He lifted a ridge as perfect as a textbook and touched a hinge lifter to it, then slid the lift into a sleeve. We'll scan for AFIS, don't hold your breath. The scanner chirped to life, a portable that never went where budgets said it should. Mina's voice filled his ear a minute later. No hit on the first pass, she said. Not in state or federal. We'll rerun since your wand picked up a clean loop. Could be a ghost. Could be a man who never gave us his hands. Ortiz angled her head toward a row of nails driven into a post. Drying strips hung there, meat at some point now jerky black. He's hunter competent, she said. Not store-bought. See the tendon lines? Squirrel or rabbit? Rabbit, Caleb said. It came out harsher than he meant. The word had too much freight, the gift on the pine, the string above the cabin, the old reports. He took pictures of the strips, then forced himself to step back and see more than the totems. There were boot scuffs at the entry, toe in, toe out, the kind of stutter you get when you listen before you step. There were 2 spent matches near the lantern base, both angled the same direction as if lit by a left hand cupped against a draft. Left dominant, he said. Tall, carries weight forward. Knife on the right hip, you see the cut marks on the crate, pulls across, not pushes down. You're talking like you've already got him in the room, Haller said. I've had him in the room since the Crescent, Caleb said, and heard the confession for what it was. He was pulling the man closer so he could put his hands on him. He was also pulling the man closer to the people he needed to keep alive. That was the mathematics he hated. You couldn't catch what you didn't touch. Vic's meter chirped a little siren. Co-bump, he said. Not dangerous, but something just burned air. You light anything? No, Ortiz and Haller said together. They cut their beams. Darkness settled fast and total, a velvet with teeth. Caleb listened. Far back in the shaft, something shifted. Rock, animal. He didn't blink. You heard more when you admitted you were blind. The noise came again, smaller. A bat. He let his shoulders unlock. Ortiz clicked her light back on and colored the world in LEDs again. We're not alone, she said, Rye. We're just unpopular. Caleb cataloged the lair one more time with camera and pen. The cot staples, the knot on the rag pile, the scuff where a heel had dug in as if the owner had launched into a sprint and then stopped himself at the last instant. Obsession left a geometry. He could work with that. They backed out the way they'd come, slow enough to keep the mind from sloughing them off like ticks. Outside, the air felt extravagant, leaf mold sweet, summer cricket loud. He wanted to keep walking until the river put its cold hand on his head. Instead, he stood with his palm flat on the cedar and let the tree tell him nothing. His phone vibrated so hard it felt like it was trying to jump out of his pocket. Meaner again, but her voice had lost the lab calm. Rockland Trailhead, she said, breath tight. Caller says she found a blood-stained cloth snagged on a branch. Parallel tracks in the mud, barefoot, narrow, and hex tread. Deputy on scene says the smear's dry but not old. He's pegging it at about 3 days. I've got a drone warming, but canopy's heavy. Annika cut onto the line, her tone at the exact edge between order and prayer. Do not split the team. We do this by the book, Rourke. Caleb was already mapping the turnoff and the feeder creaks in his head, the way light pooled under sycamores at that trailhead, and the angle you had to take to keep your silhouette off gravel. He felt the mine behind him and the corridor ahead and the thin cord that ran between them with Mara's name laid over it like a stringer on a map. Copy, he said. He meant it. He also meant to move. Rockland, Ortiz said, as if the word had a taste. He's running her trail like a rosary. Or she's running his, Caleb said, and the distinction changed everything and nothing at all. They staged out of a gravel pull-off that passed for a trailhead, two marked cruisers, a state Suburban, and a county F-150 whose tailgate had become a command table. A pop-up canopy snapped in the breeze rolling off the creek. The K-9s paced tight circles, nails clacking on the bedliner, then went still as their handlers clipped leads and checked harnesses with the same economy soldiers use on rifle slings. The cloth that had triggered the call hung from a low branch 10 yards off the lot, caught where the brush narrowed into a funnel. Dry blood browned the weave. Caleb looked but didn't touch. Below it, parallel tracks stitched the mud, a narrow barefoot print that favored the outside edge and the hex-thread boot that had become a signature. The hex cut veered once, then rejoined beside the bare print like a shadow stepping back into place. 3 days by dryness, the deputy said, cheeks flushed with the thrill of being right. Maybe 2 if you count the humidity. Caleb crouched on his heels, eye level with the story the ground wanted to tell. He found the drag in the mud to the right of the prints, just a faint sash like someone had pulled a stick across the surface. It angled away from the creek as if a body had been hauled, but the depth taper was wrong. The drag got lighter as it left the main trail, a feint that had been drawn rather than made. Not an abduction, he said. He wants us to think she was pulled off the path. K-9 handler Rhodes brought his shepherd in slow, nose vacuuming sent off air and leaf. Bootlace fragment, he said, pointing with a capped pen to a thin black string knotted to a twig. Phrase fresh. Somebody tied in a hurry or in the dark. Dr. Vic Armitage appeared at Caleb's shoulder, his pack already bleeding zipper bags and swabs. He eased the cloth from the branch with tweezers and coaxed it into a Tyvek sleeve. Protein's old enough not to scream, he said, but we'll get type. If it's human, we'll swab for DNA. If animal, we've got ourselves a man who baited a story. A drone buzzed up from the lot like an anxious hornet. The pilot, 25, clean-shaven, forearms burned to highway orange, guided it to treetop height, then pushed it east. The monitor bloomed with canopy, hickory, poplar, hemlock, the green knit so tight even heat couldn't find seams. Thermals blind under this roof, the pilot said, apologetic. I'll try obliques along the creek. Caleb stepped to the tailgate map. He drew with a dry erase, his lines moving like he'd rehearsed this in his sleep. He won't take ridgelands, too many silhouettes, too many sky cuts. He'll move the shadow bands here, and use water to wipe scent. If he ghosted the sensors after Hollow Creek, he knows where we hung eyes. If he thinks we think he took her west, he'll go east. Toward Shelter's Gate, Rhodes said, words careful like he wasn't sure he believed in the place yet. Retired rangers called it a limestone overhang you couldn't see until you were under it, a kind of weather-made porch that had fed rumors for 30 seasons. Nora stepped under the canopy, breath fast like she'd speedwalked the last 100 yards from where Annika had parked her under police escort. She wore a ball cap that said Roanoke RUNS and a fleece the color of wet stone. She gave the blood cloth a single look and did not look away fast, like she refused to be managed by her own eyes. If she's out here, Nora said, voice steady, why isn't she waving down a car? Why didn't she bang on Mr. Winslow's front door? Caleb didn't answer until he had his own voice in check. Because she's not just running from him, he said. She's running around him. Nora squared to the map. Then you run with her, not after him. Annika's call came thin through the speaker on the tailgate. You have your parcels cleared. You have your warrant geofence. Stay inside both. And repeat after me, detective, no heroics. By the book, he said, and met Nora's eyes anyway because there were 2 books here and only one brought people home. They moved as a small, disciplined storm. Rhodes took the creek line with the K-9, hugging the inside of bends where mud held scent longer. Vic and a second tech swept the scuffed saplings for skin trace and bark transfer. The drone ghosted along the watercourse like a second hawk with very bad eyes. Caleb walked point for the left flank through laurel as thick as braided cable, his radio on a tight squelch. At the first crossing, the creek chatted over flat shale, water only ankle deep but loud enough to drown a whisper. On a rock midstream, someone had ground the heel of a hex boot until the grit piled like pencil eraser crumbs. On the far bank, a scuffed sapling leaned away from the water, its leaves turned wrong. Caleb ran 2 fingers under the leaves and felt cool that didn't belong. Someone had brushed past minutes ago, or hours his brain refused to tell time. Drag mark repeats, Rhodes called from 10 feet downstream. Angles consistent with a decoy. He wants us walking the wrong handrail. Caleb pulled the notebook from a waterproof sleeve, the mine book they'd lifted from the crate under the lantern. He paged fast, his thumb blackening on the graphite. Halfway through, between the scratched rules and the sketched faces, a single sentence had been carved so hard the paper had rippled. She went east to the water. He said it aloud because he needed the team to hear it. He wrote, "She went east to the water." Either he's recording or he's scripting. Either way, it points this direction. "Or he wants you to read it and choose east," Annika murmured in his ear. He could hear her tapping a pen on a legal pad through the call. "Think like a prosecutor for 10 seconds and hate it." "I'll hate it later," he said, and put the notebook back like it had burned him. They pushed another quarter-mile. The creek narrowed, then disappeared under a tangle of limestone shoulders and root. The world cooled by 5 degrees. The drone pilot cursed softly. "Thermal's a crossword with no vowels. I'm losing link under that shelf." Rhodes, dog alerted, chest suddenly pumping rapid, head throwing into the shadow where stone made a shallow room. Caleb held up a fist and the line stilled. He stepped under the overhang. Shelter's gate wasn't a gate at all, it was a mouth. The limestone made an apron over a level patch of earth big enough for 4 men to sleep out of the rain. The back wall showed old smoke kisses, pale on pale. In the corner, tucked where weather couldn't find it, sat a crate like the one in Widow's Hollow, orange-brown, beaten smooth by hands, rope handles worn but whole. "Clear," Ortiz said from behind, her muzzle painting the lip of shadow in slow strokes. No movement. Vic went first this time, kneeling by the crate like he'd come to communion. The lid had been doweled and then wedged shut with a sliver of antler. He winked the sliver free, eased the lid, and exhaled a word that wasn't science. Inside lay 6 journals, each wrapped in plastic cut from contractor bags. On the top, in a blocky hand that was Mara's, someone had written names and dates on duct tape spines, some names crossed with a single slash. One name repeated too many times. Mara, then Mara, 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 the last scrawled harder until the tape puckered. "Don't touch the pages," Caleb said, even as his hand wanted to rip the stack open and shake time out of it. Vic lifted the top one with tongs and set it on the sterile pad he always seemed to have ready. He peeled the plastic like a surgeon. Inside, the pages ran like fever. Sketches of trails, rules barked at nobody, the crescent drawn and redrawn, a paragraph of something like prayer to the gate, and the green that made Caleb's teeth go cold. Nora crouched to see. "He wrote her like weather," she said, voice a notch above a whisper. Like she was something that happened to him, not someone who chose. Rhodes lifted his chin toward the ash ring near the rear wall. "Fresh ash," he said. "Within a week, smells like cedar, maybe shirt fabric. There's hold." He leaned in, tweezer points flashing. He lifted a charred strip no wider than a thumb, its weave a teal ghost that survived only in memory and thread. It had been burned at the edge where a cut had frayed. "The same weave," Vic said, eyes on the thread under his loop. "Windbreaker weight. If we put this under a scope, we'll see the same crosshatch as the jacket from the Fisher." Caleb listened for the mountain's answer and found only the slow drip of mineral water off the limestone lip, the click of the drone relinking with its pilot, the dog's breath. "Bag them all," he said. "Every journal. Every ash, photograph the crate, then the void it leaves." Nora touched the limestone with the backs of her fingers like you do with a horse you don't want to spook. "He thinks this is a church," she said. Caleb looked at the names on the duct tape, at the slashes through certain ones, at the way Mara stuttered, and then shouted. "Then we don't worship," he said. "We indict." Outside the overhang, the evening slid down the trunks in long strips of shadow. The corridor they'd drawn on maps now had weight and corners and a mouth that smelled like smoke and teal. Caleb felt the case turn another hard gear. The radio cracked, Mina, voice flat to hide the tremor. "Sensors just lit at Widow's Hollow, detective, motion at the hillside chamber. Time stamp 1958. Just after Mara transferred to the safe house. He looked at Nora, who was already looking at him. "He's come back to nothing," Caleb said. "Let's make sure he leaves with less." They left Shelter's gate carrying the crate like pallbearers. Back under the pop-up, Mina laid each journal on a sterile mat and photographed the covers, duct tape spines labeled in block letters, Ada 2015/K. Ren 2017 slash, Julia 2020 slash, and then 4 in a row with the same name written, rewritten, and finally carved through the tape until the plastic buckled. Mara. Dates line with the Spur Creek tally, Mina said, flipping a glove at the field shots on her tablet. Mara's scratch marks, Winters counted. The cadence is right, silent months, then bursts. Whoever wrote these moved when she did. Annika stood at the edge of the table as if proximity alone could contaminate chain of custody. Scan every page but bag the paper before midnight. Judge Connolly will want to know we respected the clock. Dr. Morrill settled on a camp stool, pencil already scratching. She read aloud without affect, Gatekeeper notes. She hears the shudder. She belongs to the trees, but they call her back to me. She paused, eyes narrowing. Self-myth. He gives himself a title, Gatekeeper, and names Mara Ridgewalker. Its control framed as reverence, non-lethal so long as the subject cooperates. When she defies, expect escalation, not necessarily toward murder, but toward correction. Nora stood with her hands in her pockets like she was holding herself together from the inside. He writes her like weather, she said, like she happens to him. Caleb skimmed another page that listed rules in a cramped, forward-leaning hand, no lights near the road, no footprints on the ridge, breadcrumbs back to gate. Below, scrawled twice, a single command, stay. He closed the cover gently and felt the old pull, get moving, go now, drag across the new duty, build a case that locks. We've got enough for a narrative, he said. We don't have enough for a warrant with teeth. Annika nodded toward the journals. We have enough to argue dangerousness and pattern. What we do not have is a person. Your boots do not go on private land tonight. Before Caleb could answer, Mina's dashboard chirped again. Another motion ping from Widow's Hollow, then a second, as if someone had stepped in and out of the dugout and turned their face to the door. He's returned to the cradle, Mina said, eyes on the feed. He expects Mara to be where he left her. He finds absence. Caleb looked at Nora. Her mouth trembled once and steadied. We need to tell her, she said, not to scare her, to give her the truth she's earned. Annika didn't love it, but she didn't forbid it. 10 minutes, she said. At the hospital, behind glass with a therapist on standby. No leading questions, no heroics. Carillion's interview room had the soothing art prints of a dentist's office and the hum of machines that never quite sleep. Mara sat on the other side of the one-way, a blanket across her knees, an IV crooked into the elbow where the veins still ran strong. Up close, the gauntness had angles, but her eyes were not lost. They found the mirrored glass with a quick, bird-like correction and then found Nora in the reflection, and the smallest nod passed between sisters who had both been counting. Quinn, the trauma counselor, said softly, Nora's here, Detective Rourke is here, we won't stay long. Mara's voice had a rasp to it, like a field radio with a damaged speaker. Not long is good, she said, mouth quirking as if a joke had survived 8 winters. Her gaze slid to Caleb. You came back. He took the chair, but not too close. We meet people where they are, he said. Not where our file froze. Something in her shoulders eased a fraction, as if the sentence fit into a groove she could trust. He kept his hands visible, his questions small. Can you tell me how you fell? He asked. Didn't fall, she said. Slid, ledge broke, I put the radio in the stone. You have to listen to rock when you need it to carry your voice. She rubbed her thumb and forefinger together, remembering the grit. Lithium keeps better in cold, I brought extras. Berries? Nora asked, careful not to load the word. You wrote about them in your guidebook, edible versus not. Mara nodded. Wintergreen, partridgeberry. Sometimes he left a handful on the flat stone by the door, sometimes a rabbit on a line. Sometimes nothing but his breath in the trees. Her eyes went somewhere else for a second, the way they had in the dugout, and came back. He said, this isn't done. She glanced at the glass. He liked to whisper when the fire was out. Caleb let the silence stand, kept the next question from stepping on the truth she'd given. In 2022, you made it out. We have a trail cam photo near Hunter's Run. You're in it, why avoid the trailhead? She held his eyes to make sure he understood she would decide which parts belonged to him. He follows from tree shadow, she said. Not path. The path is for deer and men. He likes the places where 2 shadows hold 1 person. Shadow bands, Caleb said, remembering Mina's overlay. He calls them rules. Her mouth did that half-smile again. He had a lot of rules for somebody who lived in a cave. Nora's voice, when it came, was steady enough to cross ice. Do you want to see the man who did this put in prison? Mara turned her head. Prison is a kind of stillness, she said. He wanted me still. She looked back to Caleb, but yes, I want him in a box he can't name. Annika tapped a note on her pad, testimony precise, not performative. Morrill leaned toward the glass, studying the musculature of Mara's answers as if they were handwriting. Caleb slid a single print onto the table, the trail cam still of her turning at dawn. "This is you," he said. "You look aware." "I heard the click," she said. "I thought about showing my hands, then I thought about the places where hands become cords." She breathed small and even. "So I kept moving east to water. The journals call him Gatekeeper," Caleb said. "They call you Ridgewalker. That's his church," she said. "Not mine." He wanted to ask about the crescent with 2 slashes, whether she'd seen it before the dugout, whether Crowell or Crow or whoever he was had made it into a brand. He didn't. He asked the thing they needed if they were going to close the triangle into a net. "Would you be willing to help us predict him?" he said. "Not find him, predict him. You know how he breathes. We know the law." Mara weighed him without hurry. "He circles what he thinks he owns," she said. "He returns to absence like a dog to a door." Her eyes flicked to the mirrored glass again, and Caleb knew she understood their world, the cameras, the wires, the sting, without anyone having to say the word. "Don't make noise," she added. "He listens for blunt things." Nora exhaled, not a sob, the sound a runner makes at a mile marker she knows she can beat. "We'll do it your way," she said. "We'll do it right." The counselor touched the clock. 10 minutes had come and gone. Annika nodded to Caleb. "That's enough." He stood. "You're not done," Mara said, voice like paper over flint. "But he thinks he is." They were halfway to the elevator when Mina's voice cracked over the radio, adrenaline dammed by training. "Detective, Widow's Hollow sensors just stacked. Entry, exit, entry. Time stamp 21:07 to 12. We also picked a heat halo on the creek line south of the chamber, like a body stopped long enough to cool the air. He's there." Caleb didn't look at Annika because he knew her answer. He looked at Nora, who already knew it too. "Move," he said into the mic, and to Annika, before she could marshal a statute, "By the book, with teeth." Morrill slipped her pad into her bag. "He's returned to the scene to fix his narrative," she said. "You don't let men like that write endings." Caleb pressed the elevator button and felt the building hum around him like a held breath. The teal thread in the evidence sleeve inside his case seemed to vibrate in sympathy. The triangle on the map had a mouth and a name now. The man who had appointed himself gatekeeper had come to find his gate empty. "Set the corridor," he told the radio. "Thermal decoys in the shadow bands, K9s on crosswind, drones at shelter's gate. He wants stillness. We give him movement he can't read." Downstairs, the doors slid open onto the kind of hospital night that never really begins or ends. Caleb stepped into it with the feeling he'd had at the fissure, the world tipping a few degrees toward something it had been wanting to say. Somewhere in the basin, a man with hextred boots was learning that the door he had kept was gone. They set the corridor like a net they were willing to be caught in. Thermal decoys, man-sized sleeves over camp heaters, went up in 3 shadow bands between Widow's Hollow and Spur Creek, each placed where a smart man would cross to kill his outline. A silent drone idled in the dark column above Shelter's gate, its downward light off, its thermal on. K9s quartered crosswind, handlers whispering in that particular Appalachian hush that carries command without noise. Annika parked command 2 bends back and ran the board warrants, parcels, radio discipline, like a conductor who refused to let the brass rush the song. Caleb took a low position behind a cedar snag 50 yards downslope from the dugout door. The hillside felt live under his forearms, ants root, the panicked beat of his own pulse. He had argued with time since the moment the sensors lit. Time argued back with cricket static and a thin fog rising out of the creek like a second ground. "Decoy's hot," Mina breathed over the channel. "Drone in place. If he's reading shadow temperature, he'll see ghosts." "Copy," Annika said. "No one breaks the fence by the book." The K9 on the right flank gave a single alert bark, stifled fast, not the panicked pitch of surprise. The abrupt note that says this is the moment. Haller squeezed Caleb's shoulder and the cedar's bark rasped quietly under glove. The dugout door wore fog like a shawl, and then the shawl moved. A tall, angular shadow uncoiled from the slope, not from the door at all, but from the laurel 6 feet off, exactly where a man who knew attention lived on the threshold would stand to let the idea of himself go first. He had a rifle slung low, the silhouette wrong for a modern sporting gun, more like a hunting piece with a worn belly and a mind of its own. Hextred boots planted so quietly the leaves decided to be soft. He paused, head cocked, not to listen for men, Caleb realized, but to listen for rules. A body turned by years of self-instruction will pause like that without thinking. Target passes decoy 1, no change, Mina reported, vectoring toward Creek Band 2. Caleb watched the figure watch the dark. The man skirted a trail camera with an unconscious half-moon, a motion that said he had mapped their eyes years before they put them up. He started to slip the net exactly where the ridgeline bent into shadow, a place that would hide him from the drone's oblique and from any ground unit that only hunted sound. The K-9 on the left flank, Rhodes's Shepherd, circled downwind, hit the man's ghost, and let out a single bark that wasn't loud so much as precise. The shadow checked, the case balanced. Caleb stood just enough to move the angle. Gatekeeper, he called, and the name he chose was not the one on any license. It was the title the man had given himself in the journals. The head snapped to him as if pulled by wire. You don't get to write the ending. 100 yards away, Nora's laminated photo of Mara, punched with a pinhole and wired to Caleb's vest as if it lived there by accident, caught a slat of moonlight and flashed. The man's eyes dropped to it and held. A human freeze, a hitch in a script. Hands, Caleb said, quiet. Make a different kind of choice. The man's right hand twitched toward the belt knife. Haller's whisper cut the space. Don't, he said, a word like a flat rock in a creek. For a heartbeat, everything wanted to rush, the dog, the team, Caleb's own need. But Annika's voice lived in his ear like a hand on his shoulder. No heroics. He let the beat hold, let time be a tool instead of a cover. Hands, he repeated slower. We're not the trees. We have rules that work both ways. The man's gaze went back to the photo. He stopped moving. For one wrong second, Caleb saw a father looking down at a school picture he didn't remember posing for. Then the knife hand opened and lifted, empty. Haller moved like a hinge on good screws. Ortiz came in from the left, practiced and quiet, sweeping the rifle with her forearm and turning the sling into a trap against the man's elbow. The dog held in a sit, vibrating with the permission he wasn't given. Non-lethal, Ortiz said. Haller took the legs, the earth took the torso, and the mountain gave back an old man's grunt and then silence. Ephraim Crow, the man muttered into the leaves when the cuffs bit. The voice was dry split oak. Some people ain't meant to walk in the green. Alvin Crowell, when the county made your mail, Caleb said, knee along the shoulder blade with a pressure that had more law than weight. No one made you its judge. They rolled him. The face didn't surprise Caleb. Lean the way labor leans a body, hair cropped with a pocket knife, eyes that had watched weather long enough to mistake it for permission. Hextred boots sat dumb on his feet, the soles photoclean printed onto mud where he'd stepped. Ortiz unlaced one and slid it off as gently as you take a pan off a rack. Boots match, she said, holding the sole to Rhodes's cast like a stamp to wax. Read him, Annika said, and Caleb did, the Miranda as clean and even as a prayer he believed in. Crowell watched him like a man listening for a lie and didn't find one. The rest was receipts. Mina's team served warrants like they'd been rehearsing the dance in their sleep. A dirt floor lean-to off a posted parcel yielded a shovel head with Julia Firth's blood trace preserved in the collar, buried shallow in 2020 east of the ridgeline. A trunk under a tarpaulin held a tool roll with a pry bar whose tool marks matched the 2018 break-in that ended with Dana Mercer on a kitchen floor the county had called unsolved and unlucky. AFIS, on a second pass with a scan palm from a January hospital visit 2 counties over, came back with a latent administrative print Crow had given under a different alias in 2004. His life existed in the gaps. The gaps aren't always faithful. Annika built the case brick by careful brick. We charge what we can prove, she said in the conference room where the coffee never tasted like coffee. Kidnapping, aggravated assault, 2 homicides, one by DNA, one by tool mark and circumstance. We don't overreach. We let the jury do the human part. Mara testified once with precision that made the courtroom feel smaller. She did not perform. She used verbs like tools and refused adjectives the defense offered her. He watched her watch the defendant without letting him become a mirror. When the defense asked about luck, she said, I learned to choose edges. When they asked about fear, she said, it's useful until it is. When they asked whether she forgave him, Annika rose and the judge sustained. Some questions do not belong to court. Crow's statement when it came was nothing new. Some people ain't meant to walk in the green, he said, looking at the floor so the sentence wouldn't have to meet anyone's face. No one made you its judge, Caleb said again, this time only in his head, and let the bailiff move the day forward. The jury came back in 15 hours, guilty on kidnapping and aggravated assault, guilty on the homicides, life without parole. In the quiet that followed the foreman, so say we all, Nora's hand found Mara's under the table and squeezed once, not for comfort but as recognition. Two runners tapping elbows past a finish line that wasn't a finish so much as a place to breathe. Mara chose not to speak to cameras. She chose a flat riverside greenway instead, 3 mornings a week, 3 miles an hour, Nora pacing at her shoulder. She wrote in a wire-bound notebook that held nothing about Crow. It held lists like grocery lines that turned into paragraphs about light on water and how to leave a place without breaking it. Caleb cleaned his board. He pinned the trail cam still from Hunter's Run, Mara turning at the dawn click, alert and unbroken. Under it, he kept a second note in his own handwriting, copied from a sentence he'd said because Nora had needed it and he had too. We meet people where they are, not where the file froze. On a blank space, he let himself write one more line. The teal fabric thread, sealed forever in Tyvek, lay in the drawer like a tiny flag from a country that didn't want borders. He closed the drawer, turned off the office light, and stepped into a Friday night where a high school PA carried somebody's joy across 2-lane blacktop and the hum of cicadas tuned the world to ordinary again. The forest never cared who won, but people did. And as the jury filed back and the word guilty settled into the room like summer rain, Caleb understood. Justice isn't louder than the trees. It just has to be clearer.